Is there anyone present in the chambers who would like to speak at this time? Come right down.
Thanks. I'm going to make some remarks about this. I want to make sure that we've got it.
Sure.
Good morning, or this afternoon, or the evening, whatever. I delivered a memo to City Hall this morning to each of you, alerting you to serious problems in the comprehensive plan. You should have it in your packet as well, and we just submitted a copy. We spent many hours on the research that's in that memo because we care about our community like you do. We want a plan for our city that starts with correctly sourced data and accurate numbers. We want a plan that's based on robust public engagement. We want a plan that does not leave out crucial topics. All of these points are summed up in that memo, and I'd ask you to read it. I know it's long. Central to any comprehensive plan is the underlying research. In contrast to the American Planning Association guidelines, the draft plan contains no population projection methodology for its proposals. We were surprised to see that SEMCOG data is not used in the plan. Here's one example. The plan proceeds from the assumption that from 63,000 to 112,500 new residents will move to Ann Arbor between now and 2050. That means the city will number between 186,000 and 236,000 residents. I understand that a group of realtors heard from planning staff this morning that they are hoping for 236,000. These growth assumptions are unsupported by any data. SEMCOG's 2050 regional development forecast projects that Ann Arbor's population will grow to 135,800 by 2050, an increase of 9.6% over the 2020 base year. I heard another comment was made this morning that SEMCOG data isn't accurate. Well, if you believe that the data is not accurate, then tell us what data is accurate. The public has paid $700,000 for this planning process so far. We expected a higher standard of work than what we see in the draft plan. At the very least, we expected reality. We hope you will suspend the process, correct the errors and omissions, both in process and in substance. We ask that you please add that memo, to the comprehensive plan website so the public can see our numbers and make their own decisions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lisa Jevons. I live at 1054 Martin Place. I also participated in the writing of the memo that Mr. Berry referenced. I'm particularly concerned that the plan does not comply with the RFP proposal and contract with the consulting firm Interface Studios. This contract requires a complete data-driven comprehensive plan that adheres to Michigan law and the American Institute of Certified Planners standards. We do not think that it does. The plan certainly does not follow the guidelines set forth by the American Planning Association's manual entitled Sustaining Places, Best Practices for Comprehensive Plans. I think we have a copy of that here if you would like to see it after we're done speaking. Furthermore, the plan fails to meet the requirements of the Michigan Planning Enabling Act of 2008, Section 33. This requires that plans include strategies for providing, quote, a range of housing types, costs, affordability, attainability, ages, and other characteristics, including single-family homes, multiple-family dwellings, to serve the housing demands of a diverse population. As Mr. Berry stated, we expected a higher standard of work than what we are currently seeing in the draft plan. All of us deserve a plan at least comparable to what this consulting firm provided to other cities like Grand Rapids and Baltimore, which we have reviewed. We hope that you will suspend this process and correct the egregious errors and omissions in the draft plan. Please consult the following and follow planning standards and state law. We would really like to get a plan that applies to Ann Arbor as it is and not to an imaginary future. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Eleanor Lynn. I live at 1321 Forest Court in Ann Arbor. A plan is only as good as the assumptions on which it is based. The proposed Ann Arbor Comprehensive Plan makes faulty assumptions about the future growth of Ann Arbor's population. It claims that our population will grow by some 60% in the next 30 years. The Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, SEMCOG, the premier organization for predicting and charting population growth, and the one I was required to use in my professional work, predicts only a modest population growth of 9.6%. In other words, the proposed comprehensive plan inflates SEMCOG's trustworthy prediction by almost 600%. In reality, the population of Ann Arbor decreased by 1.5% from 2020 to 2024, according to SEMCOG. And SEMCOG predicts another 3.6% decrease in Ann Arbor's population over the next 3 years. These downward trends were predicted before the Trump administration took office and cut major funding for scientific, especially health-related research, a major part of our local economy. These cuts will surely decrease the number of jobs in Ann Arbor and will cause many people to leave the area. I can only think of one reason that the city is so wrong in its fundamental estimates of future population growth, and that is to appease the builders and developers who will reap financial benefits from this plan if it goes into effect. I urge you to stop it now.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Irma Mayer. I live at 2809 Brockman Boulevard in the 3rd Ward. I'd like to follow on the other comments that you've heard about the memo that you received tonight and talk to you about employment, the employment projections that are in the plan. This draft plan presents a jobs growth picture that is not based on evidence and fact. The plan claims that employment in the city will increase by 30,000 to 50,000 jobs by 2050 rather. We ask that the plan be paused because this claim is not supported by the facts. The plan offers no evidence for this kind of rapid job growth, nor does it include a workable strategy to create all these new jobs. Its assumptions directly contradict current employment trends from SEMCOG, and they ignore the financial pressures now facing the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor's largest employer. While regional job growth has been modest, it's nowhere near enough to support a 60% population increase. SEMCOG projects just little over 18,000 new jobs in Ann Arbor by 2050. That's a 14% increase from 2020. Meanwhile, Michigan recently ranked near the bottom in national unemployment. The plan overlooks reliable data and fails to outline a realistic path for sustainable economic growth. Yet this projected growth is used to support the changes in the land use plan. Let's pause the plan and focus the attention of all residents on how to plan for a sustainable economic future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Town Stolberg. I live at 1202 Traver Street in the heart of Lower Town. You know me as a realtor, a developer, a landlord, and as a staunch advocate for affordable housing and for attainable housing. As you've heard, this plan estimates that the city will need between 30,000 and 45,000 housing units by 2050. But this is wholly at variance with SEMCOG's data. Based a more realistic projection, that the city will add about 4,700 households by 2050, according to SEMCOG. The plan offers no methodology for reaching these inflated housing needs assessments. It also fails to mention or account for housing planned to be built by the University of Michigan in its campus plan of 2050. I wrote you briefly this evening about that. It's in your packet. Last week's edit at this body's meeting seemed dismissive of U of M's 2050 plan. Yet that plan shows the university's intent to build a significant amount of housing on property that it already owns for students and for its workers. The university added about 12,000 new students in about 15 years, which really skewed our private housing market. There's no doubt about that. They use playing catch-up now. It would have been better if they'd done it earlier, but they have plans now. We have to take their plans into account in the comprehensive land use plan if they're planning on building a lot of housing that will help to rectify the problem that they created and building it on their land. I know that isn't part of our maps, but we have to take it into account in our plan because that's a significant amount of housing, and that's what has skewed our market so dramatically. The population of Ann Arbor outside of the student population is actually declining. The proposed comprehensive land use plan will not result in attainably priced housing. It simply will not. It's going to add more expensive housing. There's been theories about how that might trickle down. It's not going to work. The people who need attainably priced housing will be driven into the townships. The developers know that. The very same developers that are building within our city boundaries at the edges are building in the townships. They call it the greater Ann Arbor area. It goes to Grass Lake. It goes to Hamburg. It's considered a reasonable commuting distance within a half hour of Ann Arbor. That's where our attainable priced housing will be for our community if we don't work into the comprehensive plan something that will address direct measures to achieve attainably priced housing, both for rent and for ownership. So please, given the inadequacy of the data and the flawed plan, pause it so we can do it right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm John Godfrey. I live at 2809 Brockman. So let's talk about infrastructure because the plan doesn't. It sets ambitious goals, targets, as you've heard, for new housing, but says almost nothing about how we'll support the growth of the basic infrastructure that will be needed. There's no clear analysis of the costs to upgrade our aging systems, things like water, sewer, roads, and solid waste. Based on city documents and on SEMCOG data, the Southeast Michigan Council of Government, which does provide gold standard demographic and economic data for every municipality in southeastern Michigan, and using comparisons to other cities, each new housing unit could require between $81,000 and $113,000 in infrastructure investment. Now, if we multiply that by the number of units the plan calls for, the city could be facing a funding gap of between $2.4 and $5.1 billion over the next 25 years. That works out to roughly $81 to $170 million every year between now and 2050. But the plan doesn't explain where that money will come from. It includes no financial plan, no needs assessment, and no discussion of how to pay for this without raising taxes on residents, which will be especially burdensome on those already struggling with affordability, which we know is a major challenge. And this falls squarely on both homeowners and tenants. This kind of spending demands transparency and public input. Until the city does a full and honest analysis of the infrastructure costs and shares it with the people of Ann Arbor, the plan should be paused. We need real answers before moving forward. We can do it. We know that we have the ability and the interest and the full commitment of the community to make our city better. Let's pause the plan until these important questions can be considered and answered. That's the responsible thing to do.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ann Arbor. I live at 1915 Austin Avenue in Ward 3. I am adding comments to the memo that you were given. The plan calls for more housing but lacks solid data or analysis to support how it will address affordability. The plan does not define what affordable means or explains how it will help moderate income people, especially young renters and first-time buyers. Instead, it pushes for broad housing expansion with no evidence that more market rate units will lower prices. This approach risks inviting speculative development that could displace existing residents in vulnerable neighborhoods. The plan leans too heavily on a basic supply and demand theory, ignoring factors like developer control over pricing, income inequality, and speculative investment. Research shows that simply adding more market rate housing, especially without population or job growth, won't improve affordability in places like Ann Arbor. Even some planning commissioners and staff admit market rate development alone will not reduce prices. Finally, the plan's focus on densification and multiplex rentals doesn't reflect the real housing needs or demand in our community. Let's pause the plan and bring the community together to create realistic ways to bring more affordable housing to Ann Arbor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm
Good
Ellen
evening.
Ramsberg. I live at 1503 Cambridge in Ward 3. So I'd like to speak to the values that are stated in the draft plan and how the plan is not consistent with those values. For affordability, values that we all embrace, but the plan sadly misses. For affordability, by increasing the value of the land and spurring market rate housing, the plan will undermine its own goals. The $81,000 to $113,000 per unit in infrastructure cost will make housing more unaffordable either through impact fees or increased property values. Affordability goals cannot coexist with massive infrastructure spending requirements. For equity, infrastructure cost will disproportionately burden fixed-income residents, particularly seniors, and low and moderate-income households. Tax and utility rate increases will force displacement of economically vulnerable populations, and further loosening of land use requirements and removal of review and approval procedures will leave the city's lower and moderate-income areas exposed to displacement by speculative investment. For sustainability, water, sewer, stormwater systems have physical capacity limits that cannot accommodate the envisioned growth if it were to occur. Massive construction will generate substantial embodied carbon, contradicting the A20 goals. Capital cost will divert funds from operational sustainability initiatives, and in the plan, it neglects to include protection of natural features such that are essential to resilience, health, and welfare. For dynamism, economic trends such as declining employment and the university constraints contradict growth assumptions. The plan does not identify industries to occupy commercial spaces or employ new residents. Actual development will be constrained by market reality, resulting in partial implementation at best. So once again, I urge you to pause the plan and let's start with a better process and a better understanding. You're beginning to get that kind of feedback now from residents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name
Good
is
evening.
Richard Dokas. I live at 1243 Marlboro on the south side. I'm here to talk about the community engagement. I was very surprised to learn about this about a month ago, and my surprise is really based upon the fact that I'm the representative of our community, our housing group. And I inquired why I wasn't informed, and Brett did supply me with a list of emails that were sent to me. And as I perused those emails, I discovered very quickly that you had my email wrong. And that surprises me because my email is on your website, because I am the representative of our homeowners association. There were some that were correct, and that piqued my interest, so I went back and looked to see what they were about. And lo and behold, I actually read them and filled out the survey. The community survey was the first one that was that I came across, and I thought, that didn't even jive with this plan. It didn't even make sense. I never made the connection that survey had anything to do with this. Because as I read and filled out that survey, it never once mentioned even the word zoning, or eliminating zoning, or adding duplexes or triplexes or quadruplexes, or apartment buildings inside residential areas. There was no mention of density. It was mostly questions that you would expect on a demographic survey, like, do you own your house? Do you have kids? Where do you shop? That kind of thing. So it just simply didn't make, I never made the connection. The word, these important words that would include me in were simply not there. Okay, so, and as I read on and looked further into my emails, I came across the meeting in the box. And I was actually one of the 200 people that read that and filled it out. And again, in that meeting in the box, there's no mention of apartments in neighborhoods, no rezoning mention at all. That would have, trust me, had perked my interest. Well, there was some mention of duplexes and triplexes and quadplexes, and I remember it being at the very bottom of one of the pages, and there were some diagrams, but there was no reference that these were going to replace existing single-family homes. I think that what we need to do is pause the plan and do it right. Send out emails or send out postcards.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Nancy Villa-Bright. I live at 1222 Woodlawn Avenue in Ann Arbor. I'd like to respond to the claim that community engagement on the plan has been substantial. In reality, most residents don't even know it exists. I only learned about it recently myself, quite inadvertently in talking to a neighbor, casually. The city has done very little to inform the public. The Michigan Planning Enabling Act mandates public notice, hearings, and opportunities for community input into the master planning process. The city failed to take the minimal measure of mailing notices to all residents to inform them and seek their engagement in the planning process. There were no serious efforts to engage residents directly. Most people are unaware of the process and what it could mean for Ann Arbor's future. We know this from talking to our neighbors once we found out about this process. In 2024, consultants ran an unscientific survey that was not scientifically valid. It had no random sampling and allowed repeat responses that included non-residents and was vulnerable to bots. Only about 2% of Ann Arbor residents responded. Public meetings and open houses were poorly attended and used informal tools like dot maps, which don't provide meaningful or measurable feedback. Overall, genuine and meaningful inclusivity of the public was not a priority. There was no effort to meet people where they live, no outreach in neighborhoods to understand residents' priorities, concerns, and visions for the future of our town. No outreach to learn what residents considered to be challenges and priorities for residents in planning for the years ahead. We need to pause the plan in order to include more robust and inclusive engagement with residents and to learn from the residents about the issues facing the variety of areas across Ann Arbor. Thank you.
Thank you.